an issue that contravenes the constitutional right of access to water, sanitation, and hygiene services. Without further ado, allow me to welcome Mr. Malesi Shivaji, who is the CEO of Kewasnet, to give the welcoming remarks. Karibu.
Thank you, Mashirima. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I think in my next life, I hope to have the level of fluency in Swahili as Mashirima. But in this current life, I am a bit disadvantaged. So I will leave it to her to shine. I will shine in the next one. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session of the public policy debate on the issues of sextortion in the water sector in Kenya. This is a culmination of a process that has been going on for a while, and we'll be speaking about the finer details of the process. But we only know that we are having this opportunity today to bring different voices and an audience to basically engage in discussing the issues around sextortion, with a view particularly to look at what are the policy imperatives that then surround the evidence that has been collected and the voices that are there from the community regarding this issue. So we are glad that each one of you has made the time to be here this morning, and we hope that the session will give you an opportunity to understand the issues better, but also to add your voice into this public policy discussion. The objectives we basically have two main objectives for today, which will be to discuss a policy brief that has been developed regarding the work that has brought us up to where we are, basically with the aim of increasing the level of awareness, but also looking at digging a little bit deeper into how do we address the issues associated with the problem at hand. We also hope that by the end of this session, we should be able to collectively define a pathway of action to look at what do we need to do next in this process. Out of this, we hope that there will be an increased awareness, not just for the participants in the House, but also those whom we get to interact with, that we will be able to enrich the policy brief that we have at hand, and really use it as a tool to help addressing sextortion in the water sector in Kenya. and clearly define the course of action, the next steps in the policy making process to ensure that we are clearly addressing the problem and that there are very clear guidelines to deal with sextortion in the water sector. So again, just to thank you for your presence and really looking forward to your very active engagement and participation in the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malesi. You know, the problem with having people who are taller than the moderator is that you have to keep adjusting the microphone. After that warm welcome, it is now my pleasure to invite our panelists to the high table. The next hour and a half, they will help us better understand why we are here today. And I'd like to start with Mr. Caleb Oluoch Wanga, the National Coordinator of Usalama Reforms Forum. He's a which is a national civil society initiative focusing on the security sector reforms in Kenya. He has 24 years of experience in peace and security programs in Kenya and the Eastern Africa region. Caleb is a World Bank trained security analyst and community mobilizer working with government and local stakeholders in peace and security sector. Karibu sana. Our next panelist, Ms. Irene Guy, who is an established development and humanitarian specialist realizing vulnerable people's lives in water, sanitation, and hygiene. That's WASH sector. A sociologist and political scientist by training and a public policy scholar. Ms. Guy is currently the lead in shaping innovative work on WASH sector financing and market-based approaches on behalf of Oxfam in Kenya. Our next panelist requires no introduction because he's welcomed us into this debate, Mr. Malesi Shivaji, who's an experienced Kenyan civil society practitioner with over 15 years experience in civil society coordination, advocacy, and influencing, as well as capacity building. He is currently the CEO of KEWASNet, steering committee member at End Water Poverty, board member of ANU and PACJA. Karibu sana. We also have Ms. Sareen Malik, who is the Executive Secretary for the African Civil Society Network on Water and Sanitation, that's ANU, and Vice Chair of the Sanitation and Water for All Partnership, SWA. Sareen has been in the WASH sector for over 15 years, working in Africa and globally on policy, advocacy, program management, and coordination, strategy development, monitoring, and evaluation, training, and fundraising. Last but not least, our fourth panelist. He's not here, so I will introduce him when he gets here. Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin with a basic question. The good book says the first shall be the last, and I think, Sareen, you were the last that we introduced. What is the simple definition of this word, sextortion? What is it?
Really?
Yes, please.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to have all of you here. I know that in the room there is no need for introduction since you have all been involved, and I can see our champions over there. So I just want to acknowledge them and also acknowledge Umande Trust, Benazir, which are really the organizations and the people that drove this process. So sextortion is really there is a standard definition, but it's basically it's a form of corruption in the sense that a transaction is taking place, there is coercion, there is a power imbalance within that transaction, and in this case, whereby the transaction is sex for water. But we also have quite a bit in terms of, and this is something that's probably going to unfold in the debate, where we do have quite a bit on the issues of SGBV around water in general. And we will see why and how that goes in. But the focus has really been sextortion, where there's an exchange for sex. We're not going to use the word favor because there was a very violent objection on the use of the word sexual favors because there was nothing of a favor that was being done. As long as consent is coerced or that consent is not informed or that, as I mentioned, there's a power struggle taking place, the word favor pretty much loses its place over there. So this is something that we've been observing, or that we heard about it in 2015. It's been going on for much longer, but managed to bring it to, to the light really as of 2018, 2017. So that's really in terms of the definition in general. But I'm sure within your papers, you'll probably find the standard definition, which was done by the Association of Women's Jurists, and whereby it had been recognized as a form of corruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Serene. Malesi, KeosNet has been on the ground in Kibra and Embakasi researching on sextortion in the wash sector. What did you find out as KeosNet, and what drove you to those particular areas?
Thank you. Maybe just to give a historical perspective of how we stumbled actually on the issue. KeosNet, in partnership with Omande Trust and working with WaterAid UK at that time, was undertaking a human rights-based action learning initiative. Basically just looking at how can the human rights to water be applied in the context of Kenya, but looking in the case of Nairobi for the informal settlements. And this is when we came across, in the first instance, on the issue of sextortion in the water sector. And as we then dug deeper, we found that it was really deeply entrenched, where basically those with the responsibility to provide services severally would demand for sexual favors as a form of payment or as a condition to access services. So basically, we found that the issue was really deeply entrenched, and it then drove us as KeosNet to try and see how much more we could act and work with the local community to create an increased awareness and solutions to the challenge. Yeah.
Thank you, Malesi. Irene, I imagine that together with KeosNet and other organizations with us here today, you realize there were gaps in this particular issue. What should be done in order to prevent and mitigate the impact of sextortion in the wash sector? And is it true that women and girls are most affected? Why?
Okay. In the couple of years that I've also been directly involved in water service delivery, both in urban setups, rural, but significantly also in arid and semi-arid lands, where a number of issues are not brought to the fore. It has been profiled as a real issue, one, because of the way water and sanitation facilities are provided in the spaces that women and girls experience this, but also significantly because of the dynamics around gender inequality, where you have aspects around power and voice playing out, but also the social grouping of women and girls. In this context, you'd find that when a service is given, for example, in the context of informal settlement, and where that particular service is being managed, for example, by a man who has the resources, and the resources in this case is not just monetary form, it can be in the form of the power to decide when to open that water point. So essentially, the negotiations around opening that water point as a practical need to allow a woman or a girl to access that water would then be taken to a different level, different in the text, in the context that if a man also went for the same water facility, it wouldn't be negotiated that I need you to give me something in relation to your body for me to open this water point. So the power dynamics around gender have also played out, particularly in making women and girls more vulnerable to sextortion, but also essentially saying that the way we have structured service provision has left gaps in the context of making women and girls vulnerable. So we may do a facility in a space. I would give example of Kibera, where the study was also being done. You find a facility has been supported by government, by civil society organizations, but the management of that facility was not followed through to ensure that protection issues for women and girls are also mainstreamed in the same. So that is some of the areas that you are seeing that we have a gap, because there is a disconnect between practical needs around protection of women and girls to access facilities with dignity and the actual provision of that service.
Irene, when you talk about having men who sort of control these wash facilities, is it easier when a woman is in charge of the wash facility? Does sextortion happen in such instances, or are the incidences less?
Okay, I don't have comparable data where women manage facilities different from men. But of course, the data we have has essentially been that a large percentage of the facilities that are being managed are actually being managed by men. You'd find the water vendor who is pushing the handcart. In most cases, they are men. You'd find the kiosk operator in an informal settlement areas, where the woman would be maybe in charge of the shop inside that kiosk. The actual management of the water itself, you'll find the key is being controlled by a man. So these are patterns that we've seen, but I think it would be interesting also to profile where women actually manage. Does this happen? So I think that is something that maybe can also be looked at.
Thank you. Caleb, some of the statistics from the study done by KEWASNet are worrying. For example, 40% of the victims do nothing about the incidences, while only 5.9% report to the police. The difference in those numbers is huge. Why are there very few reporting, and why do more people choose to remain silent?
Okay, thank you so much, Mashirima, and thank you so much, KEWASNet, for this opportunity. I think the whole debate about sextortion is a security issue, a serious, serious security issue. And as you've just mentioned, why is it not being reported? Possibly we need to look broadly at the environment where these kind of things are happening. And you'd easily identify informal settlements, probably in the urban setup, where these kind of things are happening. Number one, there is a deliberate decision to make it not accessible, to make water inaccessible to many people. And you know water is life. So definitely, based on the importance of water as an issue, it will easily attract all kind of things, mostly criminal networks that would like to take advantage of this situation. Why are people not reporting? Number one, people might not be reporting because, one, they do not understand even the procedures for submitting or reporting cases. Two, people might not report because they don't trust systems that can help in dealing with the problem. All these things are happening also because of policy gaps or interplay between different government policies, maybe the security-related policies and environmental policies some things like water policies that some of which we are already discussing here. There is a serious gap, and the gap is managed by, I don't know whether I would be jumping ahead. Talking of cartel, there are mega cartels, and then there could be micro cartels that control the environment. The mega cartels play big with big connections, probably with other government agencies. And then we have micro cartels. I've worked and lived in Kibera for a fairly long time. And I'm happy to see quite a number of friends we have worked with in the community here. You look how water points are, where they are located, number one, as a security issue. And then managing or accessing that sector, that business sector, the water sector, it is serious, it's run by serious cartels. And then in safety, I'm a community safety trainer too. There's something called crime prevention by environmental design. You look at where the water points are located. Already it create an opportunity where even if it's not just sex extortion through influence, through verbal experience, influence, there are also forceful cases of rapes. You find women walking around with kibuvibuyus at 2 a.m. in the morning, even before it gets to sex extortion itself. Already the woman is badly exposed to a lot of risk, criminal gangs that could be walking around at night. So these are policy issues that need to be dealt with, because nobody, like my friend Ken, cannot just wake up and put a water point somewhere. Somebody will go and cut the pipes, because it is a few people are supposed to be in that business. Anybody else trying to possibly to get into that business, you can easily become a target. So sextortion, it goes beyond just sextortion. It's a serious security issue within our communities. So possibly as we continue discussing, we'll talk more. Thank you.
But as we remain on that, is it lack of gender-sensitive reporting mechanisms and case management in relation to sexual exploitation that makes people not report? At the very least, we all in this country can't even name names. We always talk of cartels,
Yes.
this big word, but nobody is mentioning
The name.
who is involved.
Yeah, like in the issue of gender-sensitive reporting, I know there has been a lot of efforts over the years as part of work in the security sector reforms program to set up even gender desks in the police stations. I hope you've seen something even called polycare somewhere in some of the police stations, the former traffic headquarters. All those are meant to enhance gender reporting of gender-based cases, because the way our security system was structured was not very conducive for even reporting gender-based cases. So these are part of the broader efforts in the security sector reforms to make sure that reports are dealt with. You know, you can report and then no action is taken. But now what do you do to ensure that action is taken when a report is submitted to a police station? That is why we are even talking of digitizing OB, occurrence book. You know, I know all of you know the OB in the police station. Their efforts to digitize it is meant to help in following up cases. Sio kwamba cases zilingishwa hapo. Oh, let me use English because I can see some people who might not be able to understand Swahili. 12 cases are reported, and only one case end up in the courts. Nobody is able even to track what happened to these other cases. Possibly people walked in, bribed police officers, and cases were lower from the OB book. But when you digitize OB, it is supposed to store the system. The person entering the information do not have even the authority to delete it. So it means if Mashirima was violated and case is reported, there must be a proper framework for follow-up. This will help in enhancing reporting even of gender-based cases and very many other sensitive cases that have disappeared within the police system. So I think we are also in the right track, and we will be able to do more. Thank you.
Back to you, Malesi. How widespread is sextortion in the wash sector?
It is very widespread, but it is hidden within cultural practice of it is normal. In our experience working on this issue, we have been able to see that even for the women who have been affected directly, it has happened so much over and over to the point that it's been normalized. They are not happy about it. They do not invite it. But because society has made it so permissive for some of the reasons that are already being said here, either because of the environment, the enabling environment, or just the way people behave, it's become like it's an issue. I actually remember the first times when we started with highlighting, creating the awareness about the challenge. The men's folk were in total denial. I say, but this is just normal. I mean, they looked at it as my colleague mentioned, being transactional and being, part of how business is done anyway. So without necessarily looking at the elements of violation to the individual person, it was just seen as something that has been happening anyway. It has not been reported over and over. And therefore, it's become normal. So it is widespread. And as we worked with the informal settlements of Kibra and Mukuru, we were able to see many, many more cases coming. And even from the numbers that we can speak of those who then came out to receive psychosocial support or just to speak about it, you can see that the numbers are very huge. And basically then saying that this is just where we have gone. What about those areas that we have not visited? So I think it is a problem that is really widespread.
Irene, what drives extortion? And can men play a role in the fight against it in the wash sector?
Actually, I would like to profile at this point that basically I think it's more related to the gap in the kind of justice system we have, but also in terms of the capacities of some of the statutory regulations that we have. But then also underlying this is appreciation that when you're talking about wash sector, for a long time it has been operating in silo from other sectors, because we also have the protection sector that basically has this really elaborate structure on how aspects around the protection of the rights of every individual should be addressed so that they can achieve part of their basic rights, which water is part of that. So basic rights in entirety, where we are saying that if you're talking about access, then access should not be inhibited because you're afraid that if you go to that point to access water, somebody is going to ask you for sex for you to access that. So what is driving sextortion then in this case would be, as Samson has already said, that the culture of silence around it, that is one aspect, and then the way it has been normalized to be the way of doing things. But then significantly, it's also with the response of some of the justice system I would talk about. So there are some contexts where if you find the statutory provisions fail, either because of the capacity, but also because of other underlying bits. I'll give an example where if a police if a report has been made and then there's an investigation to be done, then you'd find maybe the officers responsible saying they don't have fuel to drive to a certain point, okay? So that is a basic barrier to even go and follow through from the regulatory or from the law perspective. So when that fails, then what happens is that people resort to the informal, traditional ways of sorting out the problems within a certain community. So the informal ways is, in most cases, again, you'd have a tribunal which is convened by men. And in that tribunal, again, it's the men that are making decisions. And I'm not talking about men in abstract. I would give an example of a girl who is involved in rape, for example, where they went to collect water and somebody has had forced sexual relations with them. So the girl's father, in most cases, is the one who will be invited to that kind of tribunal just so that they can negotiate how to manage the situation. And we know of some cases, forget even the urban, even in rural areas where women and girls, or especially like, let's talk about girls who have been raped, have been forced to actually get married to the perpetrators, because then that is part of the traditional what? System. So they say, because you've spoiled, in quotes, the virginity of this girl, so you take over the girl in entirety and you pay a cow or something else. So because of that, the society feels that this is not something that is bad. They feel that it's something that can be managed. When you normalize something as something that can be managed, then you continue to enable that kind of behavior. But when we call it out for what it is, that one, it's a violation on the very rights of women and girls, and it is not something that should be tolerated, then I think people would start to talk more about it. But then again, also, as I finalize, it's also the way we treat survivors who come out to talk about it. They're treated as pariahs. They become something else. They're looked as people who are trying to ruin relationships. And even in some cases, they're denied other services within the spaces that they operate in. So with that kind of culture, then we are going to continue promoting people not to talk about the dynamics around sextortion, but then also not to have the right support structures and mechanism for the same. So in terms of the role of men that can play, particularly in this kind of context, we are saying that when you're talking about power and voice, you're talking about areas around decision making. Sextortion is not just a women or girls issue alone. It's a societal problem. So then we are talking about having men also be part of the discussion to elevate their voice around this, to speak against it. So when you have male champions, it's not perceived as a women issue, but it's also perceived as a collective concern that should be addressed.
Thank you, Irene. And at this juncture, allow me to welcome to the high table Mr. George Kegoro, who is a Kenyan lawyer and the current executive director of the Open Society Initiative for Eastern Africa, an arm of the Open Society Foundations. Prior to that, he was the director of the Kenya Human Rights Commission. If there is someone who will help us understand the whole process of policy formulation, it is George.
Sorry, George, for ambushing.
Please have a seat. I'll give you time to breathe as I hand over this question to Sareen. Sareen, on one hand, we have sexual exploitation, and on the other, we have women offering sex through seduction as payment for accessing water or sanitation services. How do we distinguish these two issues, especially when it comes to defining what sextortion is?
Sorry, I was slightly distracted. If you could just repeat that again.
Okay. So as we are talking about sextortion, we are talking about the exploitation of women trying to access wash facilities. But on the other hand, we have women who also offer sex through seduction as payment for accessing the wash facilities. How do we distinguish these two issues?
It's something I mentioned earlier on, which I think is still very misunderstood, which is the issue of consent. The understanding of what is consent. Now, interestingly enough, And this was a very open and candid debate that we had from the beginning of this program, where we had the gentlemen in the room and some of our champions, and they were right to raise it because it reflected a bit the psyche as well on the ground, where they were like, willing buyer, willing seller. So there was already an understanding or a belief that you consented to this. You agreed to selling your body or exchanging your body for water. So I think it still comes back to the very tricky issue of consent, but also people understanding, because it's not only men that had that reaction. You have women as well that have the same reaction. Or why did you agree to this? You know, or many times we've all been in situations where you know it's on the table, but depending on how much power you hold as well as yourself as an individual, you know, you're able to you know, to manage or to mitigate something like this. So there is, I don't think there's that much of a difference because of the issue of, again, coming back to the issue of consent. You know, there was some level of coercion, there was some level of abuse of power, there was some level of trust. That question would only make sense, willing buyer, willing seller, is if we're on the same level, playing level field. Otherwise, the moment there is an imbalance within the power dynamic, of course, we lose that whole understanding. There is something I did want to, there's a question you asked, I know, Irene, on whether water points that were being managed by women, whether there were less incidences of sextortion. Now, it is true the evidence is still anecdotal. It still needs to be, you know, properly collated, collected, consolidated, peer-reviewed. But I know our champions that are sitting over on the far end of the table over there had observed that the water points that were being managed by women, or the sanitation facilities that were being managed by women, had less incidents of sextortion. And this is something that we've been pushing for in the program, where we feel that a lot of these water points and a lot of these sanitation facilities should be run by women, where we're pushing for more women to take up these roles which have been traditionally reserved for men. It's quite ironic, isn't it? You know, where in the urban setting, it's the men that are running it, who have the responsibility of managing the water, but in the rural setting is the woman that has to go and fetch water. So there's still quite a bit that needs to be unpacked on that front. But again, I throw it again over here. The issue of consent is something that we really need to think about. Once we have unlocked that and well understood that imbalance or the cognitive dissonance that we see, you know, and that's another thing, because you'll have a woman standing there, you know you're being lied to, you know you're going to be taken advantage of, you know the situation is bad, but you're still standing there. Yeah, you're still standing there and rationalizing this whole thing. Because that's the other thing was, and I think Irene mentioned it, how desensitized some women get and girls get over this, because transactional sex is just not in the water sector. We're seeing it pretty much everywhere. So we do hope that if we can bring sextortion first into law, there is a proposal over here that we've made that the Sexual Offences Act should include that. Bring certain proposals within the Water Act in terms of being more gender responsive or more gender sensitive. So yeah, I think that's, I hope that was clear.
When you talk about the power imbalance, what comes to mind is also the economic power that women have in these areas, in the sense that they may not be making much money, and they are the ones who are constantly at the water points, getting the water to use at home. So how do you help these women become economically independent so that they are not taken advantage of?
They, for a long time, and I know my brother sitting next to me, Malesi, we, within the framework of the right to water and sanitation, we often say that, okay, water is not free. It's free at the Mto, at the river. But to get it to you costs money. But I think we may have to review our position a bit on this, on the issue of affordability of water. Do we have to make certain concessions within the water sector? Maybe we need to start looking at this whole free water situation, because we've seen it. I know we went with Judy in Kibera and the team of Umande, where we bought water for some women because we were going to take their time to run some interviews. And we decided, okay, we'll buy, I think we bought about 320 jerry cans, so the women that were there, we just went ahead and bought it. Only to find out that some of the women had gone back to the vendor and told him, give us the money. Give me the money.
Oh.
Yeah, that they have given you. I don't want this water. Or I'll have this water, but I'll probably have this water in another way. But you give me that cash. And how much cash were we really talking about? 50 shillings? 40 shillings? Judy, what? 30 shillings? 40 shillings? Yeah. 30 bob. Where was with Judy? 30 bob. So that raises huge questions. Should we just go ahead and push GOK, provide this water for free when, for a certain segment of society? GOK, of course, the utilities can figure out in terms of how to charge this. Should we go back to the issues of block tariff? Block tariff means subsidized tariffs, which means that those living in the leafy suburbs, your bills will go up in order to subsidize the ones in the less fortunate settlements. Yeah. So is that something that we have to start thinking about? Let's not forget the disruption that came from COVID-19, whereby we saw GOK provide free water. Am I right, Judy? Yeah. They came and gave free water. Mm-hmm. So it's been done. So a precedent has been set. Mm-hmm. So is this something that we need to push for a little further? Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Serene. George, legally speaking, how can victims of sextortion find justice? Where do they start?
Okay, first I'm sorry, I'm late. I was under the impression you were starting at 10, so I thought I was on time, but let me try and, so I was just looking at the current lay of the law regarding, I think there are two elements of, two possible issues come to mind. There's the whole idea of extortion, and there's the whole idea of sexual offending. There are many forms of sexual offending, and there are many forms of extortion, and they don't have to be related. They don't have to speak to each other. You can have sexual offending in the form of rape. You can have sexual offending in the form of defilement and so on and so forth. And then you can have extortion for purposes of, if you can blackmail somebody and say, if you don't give me this document, I will say, I will go to the media and tell them who you're, where you were yesterday, and your spouse will not be very happy to know where you were yesterday, something like that. So there are two elements of criminality that come into some kind of interplay. Now, if you look at the basics of the current legal basics around extortion, none of them speaks to the possibility of extortion for sexual purposes. So there's a gap there, and therefore that means that you're not going to find justice in the way that the law is currently looks at the question of extortion. If you go to sexual offending. You've talked about, Sareen, about the Sexual Offences Act of 2006. This is a bigger, more expanded way of looking at the whole terrain of sexual offending that was lifted from the penal code. So the extortion, the outlook of the legal outlook around extortion is contained in the penal code and is very narrow and has got nothing at all to do with nothing to do with sexual offending. It's got to do with economic crime and so on and so forth. But now, if you go to a bit of sexual offences remained in the penal code, but the blown out sexual offences provisions then are contained in the Sexual Offences Act. And again, that does not deal with, it does not expect or presuppose that there will be a situation where people are put in a situation where where there's a crime or an offense related to being procured to offer sex in exchange for a good like water. So that lacuna means that there is, it's difficult to start getting justice. But long before that, long before the path to justice, when the prosecutor decides to charge for an offense, long before you do that and it's put in text and so on and so forth, there's got to be a social thing that this is something wrong. Some crimes are wrong because all of us think there's something wrong when somebody conducts themselves that way. So, for example, if somebody kills somebody else, whether the law says that it is wrong to kill or not, we sort of, as human beings, don't like the fact that anybody should be killed or harmed or in certain ways by other people. Those are called crimes. There's a Latin for it. I'll spare you. It's mala inise. So those are crimes that are inherently there's a moral judgment about that about that conduct that also happens to be a crime. So before you get this into the realm of criminality, you've got to deal with the moral questions involved, and that's what you've been talking about. If I'm offering sex in exchange for water, in the universe of some people, there might be a question like, what is wrong with that? Unless you're able to overcome that at a social level, even if you had legal text saying that that conduct is wrong, nobody will be charged. The police will not arrest, because the police live in society and they listen to the signals of society. If the signals of society are saying to them that I have a need, the need is water, and somebody else will then say, I don't have a need, but I have the power now to give you the water in exchange for sex, and we are both willing and consenting to that. Somebody might say in a certain universe, what is wrong with that? So even if you have a law that says that is wrong, so if you are not able to overcome or to create a view in society, a dominant view in society that situation is wrong, then you're not going to ever find justice. That is why, for example, and we've got to look at the Sexual Offences Act and its journey, and anticipate that some of the challenges it has had in operation will be some of the challenges that could visit what we are trying to do here. The Sexual Offences Act sort of carved out of the penal code, which is a traditional law on penal law for everything, including sexual offenses. It came as this murky, very elitist, NGO-driven law to say, to hell with sexual offending, yeah? And we'll have bigger sentences, we'll have high-tech ways we'll enable the use of high-tech ways of identifying offenders, DNA and so on and so forth, and we lock them away. There were versions of it that said we will have a register of sexual offenders, and they will have these types of consequences to them, including castration and that kind of thing. Now, there's a silent majority somewhere. They're called men, who are like, we will wait and see how far you're going to go with that. So what has happened in actual, in implementation is the law then hits a wall of inertia, because that society that you're trying to change includes people who don't broadcast their viewpoints from the rooftops, but whose viewpoints are very against what you're trying to do. They feel assailed, they feel misunderstood, some of them feel entitled to the offending that you're trying to criminalize. So you've got to have conversations with society, all of it, including the ones that you're trying to, whose behavior you're trying to manage, for you to get some kind of progress. Why would a woman sleep with a person for what, a stinking man, whom she doesn't feel, she's not doing it because she's attracted, this guy stinking, but she needs the water. She's a rational actor. She's a rational actor. She's saying, if I don't do this, we will not cook today. And if we don't cook today, my kids will still sleep hungry, and they will not go to school tomorrow. And if they don't go to school, she's seeing her world tumbling if she doesn't sleep with this stinking man today. Now, so she's got many needs. One of the needs is her bodily integrity, but she's got other needs to do with the integrity of her family that she left at home. So as a rational actor making these rational choices that are based on her powerlessness, unless you are able to look at all her problems, not just the one that presents itself at this point, then you're not starting to address her needs in ways that society can wholeheartedly support you in moving forward and in finding justice. Thank you very much.
Wow, that's powerful, George. And what comes to mind is then, what do we do if it's normal? What do we do? Do we help these women rationalize differently? Do we help the men become more humane? And how do we do that? George?
It's not a men thing. It's an all of us thing. It's an all of us thing to do with, we are addressing a form of powerlessness. There are many shades of powerlessness. This powerlessness is coming at the point of, the persons in the people involved in, sextortion is a manifestation of power and powerless. It's power versus powerlessness. They're confronting each other. The powerlessness is multifaceted. So you've got to, first of all, recognize all the facets of powerlessness. So the person who needs water also needs food, also needs good shelter, also needs very many things that other women who don't have to do that, are not exposed to. So this predator, the person who is acting against this, in that situation, it's sort of like, this is sort of economically low-end actors, because they're also higher-end economic actors. The sexual predation happens at every level. It's not just the poorest of society the way it happens. It happens at every level, even among the elite. You want the promotion from PS to minister. One would think that you've done very well as PS, and that's enough. But you could find that there's a predator saying, for you to move to the next level, then you've got to do this. So it happens at every level. And at every level, there are power asymmetries. So that recognition is necessary, but also a determination to say this level of powerlessness that is so sort of this sort of retail the poorest of society that are being made to whose powerlessness is related to life and death choices. Because the choice between becoming a minister and a PS is not a life and death choice, but the choice between whether your kids will eat or sleep hungry, it's a life and death choice. So how do we remove people from a powerlessness that is associated with life and the death choices? I think that really is, for me, the question here.
Thank you, George. We have the general public here today, and they would want to understand what this extortion policy brief is. Malesi, what is it? What is it for, and why is it important?
Yeah, thank you, and very, very useful perspectives coming that I'm even thinking maybe we already need to revise the brief. But um, the brief, as it is it is a recognition of the level of sextortion that is happening within the wash sector, and basically just trying to position it, as Sarin mentioned, as a clear form of corruption within the sector that then needs to be tackled. But more critically, also addressing some of the issues that the panelists are raising here this morning. One, that it also has elements of protection, issues of security, as was said, issues of power dynamics between the haves and the have-nots. And just as George has said, this is not about, it's not just an economic relationship of haves and have-nots, but something more cyclic. It also speaks about the gaps that are currently existing in terms of policy and practice. So identifying the existing legal framework and what within the legal framework may be a lacuna that is giving leeway for that culture to also grow. We also, within the brief, also also asking who should be responsible, who should take lead in addressing the problem. And in this case, we are basically pointing a very direct finger to the government, asking it to take leadership, to recognize the evidence that we are presenting and the voices that are being raised at the level of the community. The brief also provides a basic understanding of the problem, including the scope. You asked a question about how widespread it is. So it tries to demonstrate how widespread it is, but also the nature of how it is manifested within the areas where we have worked with the communities. It also tries to identify what are the risk factors. What are those things that contribute to this happening more? What are the contributing factors? So that possibly we could also then start looking at how to address or mitigate against those enabling risk factors. It also looks at, because we are talking about people, this is an issue that is created by individuals, and it is the victims are also people. So we also want to see what what are the impacts of sextortion and basically sexual exploitation on women and girls particularly. So the brief also tries to bring elements of this, the impacts, and then finally it also just looks at what are the legislative and practice gaps that then need to be addressed. And we are looking at different actors, including the regulators within the sector. In our case, largely looking at WASREB, who is the sector regulator, but also looking at also the Gender Commission, looking at the county governments being the service, the mandated service level provider, as well as other agencies that we hold responsible based on the risk factors identified. Yeah.
Thank you, Malesi. Sarin, when Malesi talks about involving everyone in this policy brief, are you targeting a national or county level sextortion policy?
That question becomes more and more difficult to answer every time we go into the debates because it has mutated so many times. And I think with now looking at this policy brief, it looks like we have to go national on the Sexual Offences Act, unless George can come up with something else, or we go through a water sextortion bill, being a separate one, which would combine the issues of sextortion. Because let's not forget that there's the issue of evidence. The only evidence we have is from Nairobi. Yes, we do have a number of harrowing clips from Western Kenya, and we've heard also from Irene the situation that takes place in some of these northern areas. But in terms of cold, hard evidence, that is Nairobi. That piece of evidence costed a lot of money to get. So if we were to go national, I mean, first of all, we need a massive budget just to collect evidence. But in order to go into a national type of legislation, we need national evidence. So the idea then was that we would go county level. So maybe through, not maybe, the proposal is that we go through the MCAs, the Kibera MCAs, who are willing to pick up the text or who are willing to pick up the policy brief. What we need to do is support them in the development of the clauses. So if we can do it at the national, at the county level, and then hopefully at some point somebody can escalate it, to the national level. So that was the decision. But I think after today's debate, we have to, or is it a lack of expertise on our side in terms of how we go about, positioning this? If we go national, I mean, that's a huge undertaking. We're going to be challenged on the evidence, get more evidence. And honestly, at this point, the funding doesn't allow for that kind of exercise to take place. So, yeah, like I said, unless George can come up with something else, that the idea was to start it at county level within a water sextortion bill, maybe a proposal to the Sexual Offences Act or to the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Act. So it's still up in the air. But what we are hoping is to have an answer within the next couple of weeks, I suppose, where we settle for one, this is the direction that we're going to go into, and then take it from there. There's also the fact that we got a promise from Valentine Njoroge that we could go back to her show once the legislation is ready. And that's what we really want to do very soon, where we go back with these clauses and tell the people of Kenya that this is what it's going to look like. This is what a sextortion amendment or clause or provision or section is going to look like, and then let's see what happens from there.
Okay. Irene, how far along the policy making process are we in terms of achieving the dream of having a policy that defines sextortion in the wash sector?
Of course, as my colleagues have mentioned, already there are gaps that are existing. Even if you look at the Water Act, it's blatantly silent on sextortion. So if you're talking about even the regulator trying to follow through in terms of checking that there is compliance, then there is no document to revert back to. I'll give an example. If you're talking about the urban space where we have regulated water service providers providing a public good, of course we appreciate that the water sector has had reforms that also provides for even delegated management and service provision. So you'd find a step down where the WSPs are not providing water directly, say in informal settlements like Kibera, but they have delegated agents who are doing that. So then the question would be, if it's the WSP's responsibility to provide, but they've given somebody else the responsibility, does the regulator even has provision to do like safety audits in this process? Because even if you look at the report that is provided by the regulator, is blatantly silent around safety audits that deals with issues around protection. So that already gives you an indicator that there's a gap, because then if it's not in law, if it's not in regulation, then it cannot be monitored as well. And that also translates into the challenges around the data availability around the same. So legislation aside, I would also want to talk about practice, because we talk about the law already providing the legal basis around, particularly the constitution around the right to water and issues around discrimination on basis of ground, including on sex. But the reality is that when it comes to practice, things are a bit different. Kenyan way, they say ground vitu ni tofauti. Ground vitu ni tofauti, basically because there is also a disconnect between WASH practitioners and the realities on the ground. The basic example for me would be like this. If we say, and this has always been my argument, that poor development of water and sanitation services is not the root cause of sexual exploitation, but it increases vulnerabilities. Basically because, I would give an example, if women have to walk longer across different villages in the informal settlements to get access to water to the next point, because somebody vandalized the system and it was not maintained, of course there will be risks, particularly it's evening. That is a practical example. Or if there is a county person, like in COVID, we witnessed many boreholes being drilled and then kiosks were put everywhere. But the kiosks that were put, they are not automated. We're in the 21st century. So if you are to reduce the vulnerability of these women negotiating with a kiosk attendant to open the water, why can't you put a water ATM there so that women have tokens, they can access this water whenever they want to without this other barrier that I have to go and look for mtu wa kifungu, you know, jamaa wa kifungu. Huyo jamaa wa kifungu, you have to get them from the house. And that house space is already a vulnerability. So there are the practicalities which I think we can already start addressing, and we need to start questioning even as sector practitioners. And sector practitioners is not just for water sector alone, it's a collective responsibility. So we need to start understanding what are these vulnerabilities that we're exposing, but then also to start mapping out who can do what. And I'm happy my colleagues have already raised that. Because then issues around sexual exploitation is not just a wash sector thing. Because you also have the structural that deals with the attitudes and the culture of impunity, where when nothing is done, then it continues to work. So I think as we look at the gaps in the law, then also we need to start questioning the gaps in practice with practicalities that we can already start to address. So like just having things like safety audits for water service providers in urban spaces. And safety audits also includes the condition around reporting on cases of exploitation. why can't we even have things like code of conducts for kiosk attendants who are being delegated, agents of service providers, and they're told that if there is a report that there is this behavior you're having, we are going to cancel the agreement, or we are going to cancel the service provision agreement we have with you, and you're not going to be in business anymore. Or for the water vendors who are perpetuating this, why can't there be some form of agreements even with the formalized institutions mandated to provide that resource to say that, yes, we know you are private, we are selling to you water in bulk, but if these are the cases, then we are not going to do business with you. So I think there's so much we can still do also at the practical level, and even as we look at the policy gaps that already exist.
Thank you, Irene. George, so what do we need to do to fast track this process and get this policy brief to the levels where it can be implemented?
I think the first thing is to caution against what I'm hearing. I think you've struck the lady at the end. You've struck a good note by talking about the many practical problems that need to be overcome. Some of them fairly easily. For example, through more technologies being given attention to sort of minimize the human element, the element of human interaction, and so on and so forth. But it would be a mistake to then view this problem as dependent on establishing a law that criminalizes the behavior and then the problem is over. Why does this problem exist? The policy brief describes the root causes of the problem as it is basically partly a search for a rare commodity. So access to water is I mean, there's competition for access to water for many reasons. So you've got to address that as a problem. And there are no easy answers. It's not a one-day thing to say, how do we have more people access to access water, including more water points, including better regulated, better regulation at the access points, and so on and so forth. Those things have to be done, and establishing a law that criminalizes sextortion does not increase access. It will not increase access. What it will tend to do is it will become an excuse for not dealing with the problems that give rise to sextortion. You may have policymakers saying, hiyo shida tulitatua, tulipitisha wa sheria, those people shouldn't be doing those things that you say they are doing because the law now says they shouldn't do them. So you get the policymakers off fairly lightly by giving them an indication that the escape for them is going to be, the sink bin is going to be the judicial system, the law enforcement system, to deal with what is essentially not a law enforcement problem. It is essentially an economic problem. It's an inequality problem. So if you've got, if you look at it as an inequality problem, then you've got to take the very many long steps that are needed to sort of establish more equality. And if it is needed to also have a law that says that in the event that we've striven to achieve more equality, to the extent that we've striven to achieve more quality, and there will always be still some kind of deviant behavior, then we'll have a law for good measure. But that law would have to also deal, if you're sort of saying, if you're going to go to policymakers and confront them with the need to make a response to sextortion in the water sector, one of the questions you've got to anticipate, why the water sector? It's not the only place where sextortion occurs. There was a judge, I'm a lawyer, there was a judge who kept writing text messages to a lawyer who had a case before her, saying, I will not give you your ruling unless you give me a sexual favor. So when we were in many years ago, when I was in the Law Society, we established a committee to investigate judges when the government was also investigating judges. So this lawyer came with those texts. This is the exchange I've been having with the judge. And what the judge would do is, whenever she turned up in her court, in his court, for other matters, she would always be heard last. Whatever he would mark out whatever he would find out what her case is, and she would be kept there waiting until she would be the last one to be heard. And that way, then he gets a chance to interact with her when everybody else is gone. And so the evidence was very strong, including his texts to her and so on and so forth. We documented that fairly seriously, and I think the judge got to know we had done that. And I was in great need. I was in great demand for his audience. He was looking for me. Can you help? Things like that. Just to make this point. So if you're going to deal with sextortion in the wash sector, and that is probably needed, why the wash sector? The policymakers look at very many other sectors. They will be asking you, why this? Why not deal with it, for example, in the health sector? What is the equivalent of this problem in the health sector? If you're looking at social sectors, for example, where the largest number of people interact, where the largest number of interactions between power and powerlessness occurs, what are the manifestations in other places like that? What is the equivalent response? What are the equivalent arguments for a response or not a response? So you've got to deal with those questions also. Why are you doing this for WASH? Is it because you happen to be working in WASH? Is that reason good enough? The government or governments don't work only on WASH. They work across all the issues of the population, from water to justice to migration. Why would they be responding to just your sectoral issues that are not contained only in the sector, if as the evidence will tend to show? So you've got to also find ways of anticipating and dealing with that question if it should ever arise. So I think I haven't come with answers. I've just come with questions. I'm sorry if you invited me.
Loaded questions indeed. Sometimes it feels like lawyers and the media ask so many questions that they may sound a bit insensitive, but questions that are important nonetheless. And at this juncture, I would like us to take a short break for tea. Joanne, if you'll allow me, so that when we come back, then we can answer questions from the audience, as well as what do we do in the short term as we wait for this policy, and where do we go from here? And generally, how can the public drive this agenda in the next 15 minutes? Karibuni, chai iko nje. The tea is outside. When you get it, kindly tell us your name, where you're from, and ask your question or give a comment so that we can know who we are speaking to, who we are listening to. So please feel free to raise your hand when you have a question. But as you gather your thoughts, allow me to bring up this question that spilled over from the panel discussion. And I would like to start with Caleb. Caleb, before we took the break, we were talking about how to get this policy brief to the levels where it can be implemented and how long that would take. And George truly took us through that process. But Caleb, as a security expert, before we get there, before we get to that policy that can be implemented, what can we do in the short term to ensure that our women and girls are safe as they go to fetch water or use sanitation facilities?
Okay, thank you so much, Mashirima, once again for the opportunity. Uh, as we talk on how to help women and girls to fight against extortion, the first thing that even my brother George mentioned was the issue of access to water itself. What are the challenges with the access to water? Because it is lack of water that leads to these other things that are emerging. Now, there is also Water Act. There are also other pieces of legislation that have created even some regulatory bodies like WASREP that had been mentioned. How effective are those pieces of legislation? What could be the gaps that are there in each of these pieces of legislation that makes water inaccessible to majority of the people? You realize that getting clean and quality water is a big challenge in Nairobi city, not only in informal settlements, even in some of the high-end estates. People have taken, commercial entrepreneurs have taken advantage of lack of water to do business. So they are part of the broader cartels that I mentioned earlier. Then the second thing that we need to look at is issue of extortion and access to justice, which also George mentioned. How do we make sure that cases can be followed up to the end? These are part of the real challenges that we are facing in the country. And as George said earlier, it goes beyond the water sector. So if we want to engage even with the government, how do we help to customize what we need within the specified time? Allow me to give an example when you asked about whether we make it a national or a county government thing. And I would give you an example of what we have just done through a whole process of developing Prevention of Counterterrorism Act for the county government of Nairobi. Yeah, because sometimes national laws are so broad that following up becomes a serious challenge. How do we customize one for the county government? How do we identify collaborators, even within the county assembly, where we can channel our ideas, then we can turn it into some pieces of legislation at the county level. Yeah, then we get to the next step. Then we talked about how do we strengthen also representation. We are in a political season, and we know the role of politicians in all this is very key. How do we ensure, now, ladies and girls, how do we ensure that we can push in some ladies into positions of leadership that can help advance some of these things? Because sometimes we elect people who either do not understand or just do not care of what's happening around us. Then finally, how do we build community structures that can safeguard women and girls in our society? We have a constitution that have created a lot of opportunities for us. Giving example of the National Police Service Act, I think they saw some member of the police service in the room, which has created a room even for establishing community policing. These are the kind of structures that we need in the society that will help to protect the vulnerable in the society. You know, most of these things are hanging, so nobody bothers to follow up critical things. Or we force people contesting for political leadership to make some of these things their agenda for elections.
Conferences like this to take it now to the level of such a taboo topic. Nobody wanted to talk about it. It had to take intentional efforts to literally open up that space at the local level. So those kind of intentional efforts is also what you're looking at. How do we start making it part and parcel of the conversation at the local level? I know we, in most areas, there are dialogue forums that have been organized. It can be a dialogue forum on security matters and all that. How do we start to ensure that this also becomes an agenda as part of that, so that people can start to talk about it? And then maybe as I finish, I know a lot has been mentioned about how sextortion affects women and girls because there is data around that. But then the key bit would also be to spin this not as just something affecting women and girls, but I know there also may be men and boys who are affected, but it's underreported. So how do we make men and boys feel like they can be part of the conversation to also talk about their experience without being stigmatized, but then we generate insights on how to deal with this? Because it takes two actors to actually have the situation become a reality. So the views of women and girls as first level survivors, in most cases where it has been reported that they are mostly affected, is very critical, as well as the views of also the men and boys as the support or anchor structure in the spaces where women and girls live and operate in. So I think that collective responsibility can really go a long way in putting that practice to become a reality, to actually start to deal with matters sextortion.
Thank you, Irene. And I like that you said that this conversation should not be restricted to this room. Let's also drive this debate online by tweeting using the hashtag sextortion in WASH. I'm sure there's a lot that we've learned. You can put it in summary. Make sure you're tagging the right people so that this conversation keeps moving forward. I'm waiting for people to raise their hands and probably give us their experiences. We have the champions from Kibra. Perhaps you can tell us what kind of experiences you've had with women and girls who have been sextorted as they try to access sanitation facilities, wash facilities, or anybody else in the room. Please start by telling us your name, the organization that you work for, and give us your comment or question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Patrick Alube, and, the Executive Director, Kwaho. Yeah, and just the last question that you've asked about how do we bring in the community, how do we have, and then Caleb has also talked about the community structures. I think that is one thing that we really need to see. How can we empower the communities that they can also come out with this? That even if it's creating those safe spaces for them, so that whosoever is a victim of such thing can be able to go and report or can be able to bring up the matter without even being victimized. I think that is also one thing that we need to look at. How can we work with our schools so that even the schools can be able to bring out this? Because I am tending to think that most of the problems that we have within our settlement also, it's us who have solutions to them. And so how can we come up as a community and be able to help each other so that our children are not going to fall victims and our wives are not going to fall victims, and there is a way that these culprits will be, be taken out and be punished for what exactly they are doing. So the community structures actually really need to be strengthened. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for that comment. Anybody else? There's someone there at the back. There's a lady here.
I'm Jen Mulanda from Kibra. I think everything is rounding up on empowerment. Because if we empower a woman, they will know it's the right to have water, it's the right to get the right wanatreatiwa vizuri. It's also their right to be respected as women. So the only thing that we need to do as a community, as a country, is to empower our women. I'm not saying that we should not empower our men, but we should empower women because most of them don't wanakuwa na hiyo shida kudhulumiwa. Kwa hivyo mimi kwa upande wangu ningesema ya kwamba tuelimishe wanawake zaidi na wajue ya kwamba kupata maji ni haki yao. Any services in this country is their right because they are Kenyans by birth, hata kama si by birth, but so long as you are in Kenya, unaruhusiwa kupata maji, everything in a good way. Thank you.
Asante sana Jane Mulanda hapo akisema wanawake waelimishwe wajue kwamba kupata maji ni haki yao. Another lady here.
Yeah, my name is Dorcas. I'm the executive director at Binti Africa, and we work with communities. Actually, this issue of sex for water is an issue that all of us need to join our forces and address it, because there's someone we shared with them about the issue, and they were wondering, is there something like sex for water? So, you know, first of all, it is something that we need to do a high sensitization about it, because even some Kenyans, they ask you, is there anything like sex for water in this country? So as it is said, information is power. What I think we need to do is to go down to the communities, especially those places that these issues are happening. We engage both men and women. We engage both girls and boys on this issue. We have those forums. We call for forums where we are able to talk to them about the issue of sex for water so that they know that this is an issue that is out there, everybody knows. Somebody talked about empowering women. It is good to empower women and to have, like, we need to have kiosks or water vendors who are women. We just need to push for that. Because, you know, when you're a woman and you're selling water for your fellow woman, you can't ask them for sex. So let women also come into these spaces of water venting and come together and see how are we going to deal with the issue of the cartel thing. Because you see, like, in every area in this country, we have that issue of cartels. So how are we going to go about it? Because if you cannot finish the cartel, then there's no way a woman will get into that space to sell water or to be a water vendor, because it, in quotes, ina wenyewe, it has those who own that space. So another thing, as we talk about sex for water, we need to know it's not just having sex for water alone. When a woman or a girl is exploited sexually in exchange for water, it comes with a lot of things. Some girls get pregnant, like the young ones. And we need to know that this thing now comes up also with STDIs. It can come with HIV. You can exchange sex with that person, that vendor, and they are HIV positive. So as we are looking at the aspect of just exchanging sex for water, we need to know what are the effects that comes with this issue. And this will help us to amplify our voice when it comes to the issue of sex for water. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we take another comment from the audience, allow me to give this opportunity to Sarin.
Thanks. On the issue of empowerment, there's something we did not mention within the program, which I think is extremely important. We've heard from our panelists, we've heard also from George, power versus powerlessness, the various dynamics. Now, this program, it did something that was very unusual. When we brought the SGBV experts on board, there was a proposal, even at the design of the concept, that we needed to put psychosocial support for these women. Who would have thought that the water sector or a water program was actually going to be doing, mental health type of activities? Now, The safe space was set up at Umande Trust, and we have a counselor and a doctor that come in every Wednesday and Saturday, isn't it? Yeah, Wednesday and Saturday. And you have the women that come in or to report or just to seek help with the distress of poverty, the distress of being invisible, the distress of being beaten up at home, the distress of being deprived of of being you, as a human being. Now we found that yes, we were having the complaints coming in from victims of sexual assault, but also those that have found themselves in difficult situations. And the doctors and the counselors, what they do, yes, number one is of course counsel the victim, but also help them in terms of coping. And so it is important, and that's just the way Jane had mentioned, to address the root cause of the disempowerment. What is causing the disempowerment in the first place? What is it? Because I can tell you this much, that if you are not in the right headspace, even if you're given a seat at the table to make your voice heard, your voice will not be heard. You will not be able to voice. Now, maybe Judy can confirm that some of the women who have been through some of the counseling and some of the support that has been given have become a bit more assertive or a bit more confident, know how to recognize what kind of behavior is wrong or what kind of behavior is inappropriate. Because a lot of times when he's the vendor, and like George said, that stinking man is there, smiling at you and giggling with you, or, touching your arm slightly or your back, they must be recognized as inappropriate behaviors. Nobody should touch you without your consent. Again, we come back to the issue of consent. It is not normal for him to touch you. So the psychosocial support actually has proven to be a very powerful tool to address the issues of disempowerment. And it's not only the water sector, women from the water points, or actually, and I know Benazir can confirm that, is that there are other women that come just to talk about the distress that they are experiencing in their daily lives. So to all of us over here as practitioners, you must consider the psychosocial support element in empowerment and capacity building programs. I'm going to go as far as saying that if you do not address the disempowerment, or if you do not address the issue of teaching this woman or this girl or whoever it is to be more assertive or how to cope with her distress, then I can assure you, you can run all your capacity building programs you want and empowerment programs. It's not going to yield. There will be no impact. Because the fundamental tools, because some of us here, yes, may be fortunate when we go home, we have good social, support systems at home. We have access to, a lot of resources and material. We have, there's a lot going on around us to keep us sane. Not to mention, food, shelter, water, etc. And we're still having issues dealing with reality and the world. Now you imagine somebody who, where all these things are not there, on top of the abuse. So I thought it would be important to mention the element of the psychosocial support in empowerment programs and capacity building. Thank you.
Thank you, Serene.
Morning.
Morning.
I'm Daniel Makaumutisia from Omanda Trust and a water vendor in Kibera and a former chairman, Majibora Kibera, for those who knows Majibora Kibera. We have our challenges as water vendors. One is coordination between water vendors and the Nairobi water facility. No coordination there. So when water is rationed, vendors has no say. They do ration the way they want. That one is a challenge. Another challenge is weak regulation of private water vendors in urban. regulations here matters a lot, because wherever there is no law, no sin. So if we can have a well-regulated private sector, well-regulated in urban, we can move, because we do coordinate, we do regulate, and move. Another one is rationing of water. The facility doesn't matter the population in Kibera. They do ration 2 days or 1 day, or sometimes no water. So rationing is a problem also, it's a challenge. When I come to cartels, I don't understand cartel, because there were cartel before between water vendors and the facility. But in this sector, in this cartel between the water vendors and the community, I don't know how it comes, because there were cartels, there were corruptions, vandalizing of pipes, and somehow we sorted that challenge. In Kibera, totally, no networking of pipes, especially the government ones. The one we have there is for the private people. People do have their pipes, they do network themselves. So especially the county government have not piped any. No piping there, which is piped by the whatever you can call county government. We cannot about the overcrowding. We have overcrowding, which causes all these sexual behaviors and whatever. If we go and crowd somewhere and we have nothing to do, sometimes we do have 100 vendors who do queue in our tanks. Now, sometimes it becomes occurs. So many things do occur, friendly and whatever. I do dealing with the negotiated sex. Negotiated sex is a matter which is heavy for somebody to discuss and to judge it. How can you charge a negotiated sex? It's a challenge, because people do negotiate, not necessarily living, but negotiated. So that one is something to be noted as negotiated. I said you're not. My final comment. Water is business. No, says you take it. You are consumers. We are business people, and a businessman is a business. You do bother about your business, and your attitude is towards money. You are not. Attitude is towards money, not towards sexual behaviors. You want the money. You don't want all these people you are commending. We are after money. We are not after sex. So even though they are sex, I cannot deny, but minimal. For those who have those challenges of whatever sex behaviors and whatever, minimal. Because we are after money. We are not after what? We are not after sexual characteristics. We are there for money. Can I go on? Or you want to Amal, can you finish? Oh, can I finish?
Yes, please.
I've finished.
Yes.
My name is Vincent from Kibra, and I run an organization called Sanitation, community-based organization. And talking on sex for water, I think it's a serious matter that we need to deal with. But and again, what I can say as Vincent is that we have gaps in sexuality-related policies that ensure that law is taking its course. And I thank God that it's happened that our CBO was one of those CBOs that were engaged by Kewasnet and Umande Trust to raise awareness on sex for water through theater. And what a vendor is saying here, sijashika jinake vizuri, Makau, what Mr. Makau is saying is right, because we did like 6 activities. And in one area around Darajani, we had a community person who called one of our members after the activity and said, these water vendors, at times, they negotiate. Because even as we speak here, there are areas in Kibera that there are no water sahi. There is no water now in Kibra. So you find that someone is coming from Lindi to the other side of Kianda. For you to get water, there is something that maybe will happen for you to get that water at the end of the day. And it's not much water, maybe it's 1 jerrycan, 2 jerrycan. So at times, and she was told, she was a lady, and she was told that at times, we negotiate with these water vendors for us to get what we can get. So how can you help us? And with all that, what can I say? Much awareness need to be created down at the grassroots. Because you find that what we did was not enough. Maybe there are some areas that we didn't target. And these things are really happening kule mashinani, because you find that a mother sends her daughter to go and fetch water. At the end of the day, when the daughter is coming back home with the water, and the water is not in Kibra, then you start asking yourself, how did she get the water? So I think this is something, and I must thank Kewasnet, because this is one of the creative projects. Most of the organizations that just discuss about gender-based violence. But you see, Sex for Water, even by the time we were disseminating this information through theater, people were like, is this thing happening? But if you go back to the grassroots, it's really happening. So much need to be done.
Thank you, Vincent. Allow me to throw a spanner in the works before we continue with the questions. There's something that you've mentioned, Vincent, that brings me back to something that Irene said. She talked about having a code of conduct. Perhaps, Malesi, you can respond to that. Is it possible for the water vendors, like Macau over there, to have a code of conduct whereby they're talking about water being a business transaction, but what happens to the person who's running that facility when they're having this negotiated sex?
Yeah, I'll speak about two aspects in response to that. One, that these are agents. As far as we are concerned, water service provision has not been privatized in this country. So even as Macau is a business person, under the law, he is not a service water provider, but he's an agent of the water service provider. So he is working under license of a licensee who is regulated within certain standards that are provided for, and which, as Irene was saying, maybe we need to speak much more about the safety audit, where we are not just talking about the physical aspect of water. Is it clean? Is it safe for drinking? But we're also talking about how are the agents of the licensee managing the service distribution? Are they the ones creating an artificial shortage, for example? Or is it that there's actually a rationing according to the plan of the service provider? So we need to understand that these are agents and they are not there to make money for the core aspect of it, but they are there to provide service. Of course, the licensee then provides them with some leeway to make business sense for them, but they are doing it as an agent of the licensee. So when the water vendor, when we have a problem with the water vendors, we will take it up with the licensee, because under law, they are the service provider, and they have been mandated to provide clean, safe water at an affordable rate at all times when it is sufficiently available. Then the second aspect I would want to speak to is what both Macau and Vincent have raised about the negotiation aspect of it. Again, I will go back to what Mr. Kegoro raised earlier, and Sarina had also mentioned it, about power. It's a power relation. As long as we understand that even when this woman comes to you and says that she is offering this, she is not offering it from a position of power. She is disempowered to the point of getting to that point. And as an agent, you do not have, under the license arrangement that you have, you do not have a leeway to exchange sexual actions for water. It is not part of the agreement, isn't it, Macau? There's no time Nairobi Water has said, when you feel like, you can get some sex and give water 10 jerrycans. There is no such, I mean, the moment you do that, you are abusing power because you are the one who has power. So this issue of negotiation, let us not lift it up to a point where we are giving it credibility. We should look at it from the perspective that it is a whole issue of disempowerment. In fact, it is disempowering the woman even more by the man entertaining that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madesi. There's a question right there.
Okay.
Oh, there's someone who already has the microphone. Okay.
Can I go first or you,
please,
or
please
you
go
go
ahead.
first? Okay, my name is Richard Amwai. I work for a company called Think Place, and also I run an organization in Kibera that does theater. So I'll just start by asking questions to ourselves. How many of us are parents to daughters in this room? Yeah, okay. So do we talk to our girls about sexuality? Let's be honest. Depending on the age, yeah? So it all depends with the age. So what am I trying to say? Empowerment starts from home. Empowerment will never come from somewhere else. Empowerment inafanyanzie kule baba ambaye wewe ni baba au mtoto unamuongelesha nini kuhusu her sexuality? What are you telling her about that boy? You get it? Another thing that I've seen that is coming up in this room, it is how we present our women in the society and how they present themselves in the society. Allow me to drive you away from whatever we are discussing, but just to give you an example of why a woman will be taken advantage of. Go to a hotel, when the bill comes, who's giving the bill? The man, sindio? So tumeka huyu mwanamke kwa level ya yeye ni wakufanya nini? Yeye ni wakupatiwa. Yeye si wakutafuta, yeye ni wakupati, yeye ni wakwenda kuletewa na wapewe pale nyumbani. Si kwa ubaya, but nataka tu tuangalia hii scenario kiukweli. Next itakuwa ni mambo ya stima. Kibera kuna vitu mbili zinafanyika. There's two things. There's water and there's also electricity. There's no one who is licensed to sell water in Kibera. There's no one who is licensed to supply electricity in Kibera. But it's happening. Why? It is what Caleb said, cartels. Now these cartels, they work with the Nairobi Water and Sewage Company, they work with KPLC, and they also work with the authorities who are in Kibera. And pale kwa chief, there's one person who normally opens the tap, the maji fainini, iranokwa pipes. So if you're not close to that person, your water point will never get water. And that's now how it starts. Because this person is spending money for his tap to be opened, utapata pia sasa anafika point ya kusema, okay, sawa, if this is happening, then even me, I'll do this. And it happens a lot. Sawa. Another thing that I'm looking at, and it's also coming out, but it's not being said, it's how we define our gender roles. Hapa ni wangapi wanatumanga watoto wao vijana wenda wachote maji isipokuwa wasichana? Tuseme tu kweli. Maji imekuwa ni ya wanawake watafute maji, si ndio? Then we tell our boys they are the security of these girls. Only that. Then we expect men to understand that a woman is also a human being as the man. It's very difficult. So me, what I'm trying to say here is, when we look at problems, let's go deep down to that household level, not understand like, huyu mzazi anaambianga nini mtoto wake, nini anamfunza kuhusu the other gender. You get it? Instead of pointing fingers towards a certain population or a certain gender, how are we defining all this that is happening within our society? And then how are we coming up with problems that will be there permanently? Not just saying it was an initiative of Kewasco or Rumande Trust or whoever came or whoever had budget to do that. You get it? Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Vincent. Okay, Macau.
Unasikia na Kiswahili eh? Hapa ni kurekebishana, msituwekelee misiku ambao hatuna.
Kabisa.
Sisi nimesema watu wa hapa wanalipa maji tarifu ya juu. Sisi tumepewa fursa kama water vendors, tunalipa tarifu ya chini. Tunaeleweka na facility. Now we do negotiate with facility. I'm the chairman of this water vendors. Tuna negotiate na facility. Kwa hivyo atufanye illegal business. Tunajulikana tuko pale, tunalipa mita, tunalipa kila kitu. Sikatai kama hakuna cartel, siko. Na nisa kurekebishwa, as we have said, nisa rekebishwa. But we are moving.
Thank you. Can I give some inputs? Thank you. This conversation reminds me of many years ago when I used to work around Lake Victoria on HIV programs. And what transpired was the same thing as this, that we had high incidences of HIV along the beaches and where we had beach landing, some of you know, the landing places. Why? Because the women who went to get fish were negotiating with the fishermen for the fish. And it was about that negotiation, about sex. What you had about the power. I have the fish, and you don't have, and you have to sell fish. And fish is scarce even now. And so for you to get fish, we have to negotiate with you on how you pay the money, and then it pays for something else also. But it's the same thing. And I want to agree with Malaysia that this is about power. There's no negotiation about, if I don't have the power and you don't have the power, and negotiate with me, we're not equal. And we are not talking about at the same time. So what do we do? Because that was a very serious issue. Some is still there, but that time of AIDS was a very serious issue because the fish landing beaches had the highest incidence of HIV along the Lake Victoria. And I used to work there, so I know. Like what you're having now in water. And I'm all for empowerment of the women. I'm all for society. There will also be scarcity in this world. Even now, fish is still scarce, Victoria, the same way it was. But the way we did it was the same way about empowerment, same way about psychosocial support, but also went further. And now went to what I heard Dr. talk about a bit, and also Mr. Malesi, about the structures on the ground, talking to the men, and having a structure and not empowering them, advocating them in terms of having the rights of the women and for them the right to sell fish. For them to see that it affects them also. Even as you have negotiated sex, it also affects you as a family, because you are a father and you have godchildren and you have that. So even that vendor of water, if you convince him that what he's doing is wrong, I think that can happen, because we did that in Nyanza. We're able to convince the fishermen that even as you have multiple sex with the women who come to buy fish, you can still take aid to your families and wipe up your whole family. So that helped us. So I'm saying that apart from empowering the women, apart from psychosocial support, also have programs to target the men who actually sell the water. And let them also know that what they're doing is wrong in a way that they understand. Let there be structures. Because again, what helped us again were the leaders, the beach leaders, where they had to have structures. When you're bringing fish, whom are you selling to, and how are you selling it, and how do you distribute the fish among the people who want them. So again, the same thing can happen, even from what I'm hearing my brother there saying. We can be able to talk to him, and he understands that there's nothing called negotiating for sex with an unempowered person. It's not there. And also what he's doing can also affect him as a person. So we talk to the people, again bringing in themselves being the center, because it could be about them and us. For them, me, I want to sell, and I can get sex for selling that water or fish, whatever it is. But again, tell them, so what's the effect of having that as a person, as a family person, and also having structures in place for selling these fish, be it water. Thank you. That's my experience.
Asante sana. There's a lady here who has a burning comment. Please start by telling us your name.
Okay, my name is Judith Shitabule, one of the Stop Sex for Water champions. I've been on the ground and I can really testify of what has been happening to the ground. It's real and it's not just stories, but this is real. This is happening, especially to people living with disabilities. They're being affected the most. And then we have the general population, which is also being affected. And we have so many tangible evidences that have been happening. But now my comments are, yes, we have the psychosocial support part of it. And I know they're getting more numbers because as we started championing this thing, it's when now people knew it was a problem. In the beginning, they thought it was just normal for people to do such things. They did know it's against their rights. And it's both genders. It's not about female and girls only. Even with male, it's happening. Only that they've been not speaking of it simply because there's stigma, which is there up to date. And two, it's like, how do I start talking about this thing? It's like a taboo. Cultural practices. When a person is telling you, you know, when you go to water from our ancient days, it's where you will get a wife. So it's normal to idle there, to look for one who I can marry. There are people even that are saying we got our wives from these points, you know. They've taken it as very normal, it's a normal thing. Then the psychosocial part of it has really helped us, has really helped the women who are going for those services. They can now talk it boldly, they can stand, and they refuse, and they deny. Personally, I remember I talked to a vendor, and for now, that vendor has really erected the boys, and now it's a girl giving the services. And it's really working. He normally tells me, in fact, you've helped my business, because now I'm getting much profit than the other side. And I'm asking, like, do you think what is the issue now that you are getting? I said, no. More people are free to come to get the services because it's a female who's giving the services. Then when I come to the structures, what can we do? As much as we are doing the social mobilization part of it as champions on the ground, what is being done? How can we change this social mobilization to advocacy? And when I reach on that advocacy part of it, I'm like, does the government give budget on these issues of water or wash in general? And if it's there, what does really entail? What is done to really entail this? Then as we are looking for the policy briefs and to put it into the structure, that is the legal part of it, how do we do the PEA approach? When I say the PEA approach, I'm like political, economical analysis. Who is this politician or a decision maker who is highly influenced, has the high influence, and also has the passion of eradicating this? How can we get such people? How can we involve them? How can they push our agenda to the decision-making process so that it's being budgeted for as a country, so that we may eradicate this thing for once and for all? How are these structures being put in place? Because we need to give, even if there are police officers, we need to give them humble time. You say I can go report a case, but when it comes to the justice system, there is no witness. What am I going to do? Those are things that we need to be asking ourselves. What are we going to do when it reaches here? When it comes to sexual harassment, mostly it's verbal. How do I give the evidence when it comes to court? You know, because court wants tangible evidences, and they are not there. What are we going to do? How are we going to involve these decision makers to push this agenda when it comes to the House? If it's the MCS, if it's the senators, I don't want to know, but how are we going to do this? Are these people, are they having the passion for women, for girls, for boys? And when it comes down there in social mobilization, how are we going to hold dialogues? Because our community has this kasumba of, I go to the meeting, am I going to be paid? You know, we have that issues also. How are we going to tackle them? Because it's a problem. It's there. We have the evidences. But how do we handle it?
Thank you, Judith. Quite passionate. And I think there's a lady there who wanted to say something. Oh, there's another one here. Okay.
Question for my speaker. My name is Aden from Kibra Police Station. I have a question for her. She said the water vendor changed the management to a woman or a girl, and he started getting a lot of profit. My question is, there was a man who was selling the water, and he was being sacked. As he was sacked, his family or him, his family or him, they are at disadvantage because he could have been educated so that he can do away with the behavior which he was doing. But the moment you sack him, the trend will continue because he is not in the water vendor section, but outside there within the community, he can do what he was doing again. What action will you give us so that we can?
That's why I've said we need to have community structures where we have dialogues. Because when we have dialogue, everybody is included in the dialogue, the perpetrator and also the victim. They can be there so that views will be shared and a person to change will change. Even though change is not for one day, but it's a continuous process, but they may change from that.
Mashirima,
Thank you, Judith.
can I just make a comment as I disappear?
Okay,
Sorry.
Caleb.
Yeah. I think I remember based on, you talked even about funding structures. We can only fund them if they are within certain laws. And that is why I suggested that if we can design a strategic approach, possibly, I know the life of the county assemblies and the national assemblies are coming to an end. But this can be a long-term strategic approach. How we did with the Prevention of Terrorism Act in the County Assembly of Nairobi. We go that direction. Then we can create structures that can be funded by Exchequer so that our efforts to reduce extortion within our communities can be minimized. Otherwise, we can talk to ourselves forever, and then the action continues. I heard the chairman of the water vendors, Bwana Makau, is a long-term friend. Yes, I know the word cartel sometimes is very difficult, but we tried to establish, to run one of the toilets built by NYS, one of our groups in Kibera, is when we met the real cartels, my brother. Actually, they ripped the entire piping that we had connected. We repaired it. They came again at night, ripped it. And we were told that it is so and so that is sending water there and there that are doing this. So it requires a very strong approach, and it's good our police officers are also here. But sometimes they get consumed in the networks. But we need to do a lot. But once we have a strategic approach, we will be able to deal with the problem. And we can go the county, Bwana CEO, we can find a way of going the county way of supporting, identifying a member of the county assembly who can support us to advance this. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Caleb. Allow me to now give this opportunity to two of our audience members because time is running out and we're hoping that we can finish this in the next 10 minutes. So please keep your comment brief. Remember to tell us your name and organization.
Thank you so much. My name is Edwin, and I come from Kibra, Kibera Kids Youth Organization. So my comments are just brief on the policy document, and I've seen in our figure 6 where we are seeing factors that contribute to sexual incidents. you see things like insecurity, peer pressure, disrespect to women. These are things that can be easily taught in schools. We can even adapt. Because we need to do things differently. I've been in meetings whereby we've come up with policy documents, M&D frameworks, and all these Sexual Offences Act with NGEC. I remember doing one M&D framework in 2014. But you see still at the policy gap, all these are legislative actions that are just given here to change the legal definition of Sexual Offences Act. You see there's inadequate oversight. All these are things that if the community is empowered through education, there are things that will be a theme of the past. And I'm seeing the recommendation, still in the recommendation part, there's nothing like educating the community. We are just talking of educating the stakeholders, but we are not focusing on how do we prevent this through education. So to me, I think we need to start doing these issues differently so that we can get the impact that is needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. Allow me to now give the lady in yellow.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mildred Malwa from Kibra. I'm a survivor. And I have like two comments. One, on issue to do with the water problem in, let me say in Kibra. NMS established boreholes in each and every ward. But the problem we are having, each and every borehole has like 2 water kiosks, of which is not even sufficient for the population of Kibra. So what I would suggest is maybe they add more water kiosks so that we like tupunguze the congestion of one water kiosk, because there is a time even we had to go to the authorities to talk about the same issue. Then they said that according to the plan, each and every water kiosk they were going to give each and every borehole one water kiosk 100 meters away from the borehole. And it's not even sufficient. Because one, if we have sufficient water, we won't have this issue of sexploitation in Kibra. So I would suggest we have more water kiosk as per the borehole, because now Nairobi Water Company doesn't have enough water for the people of Nairobi. Thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, allow me to add a comment or two that has that I believe our panelists can make it, the responses can be also the closing comments from you guys so that we can be able to keep time. Please keep it brief.
Thank you. My name is Eva from Water Sector Trust Fund. Water Sector Trust Fund is a government institution that is mandated to fund water and actually specializing on the marginalized and the vulnerable groups. So maybe my point today is tell you you're not alone, and we are very responsive. We are making our policies responsive on issues of gender. And maybe to start with, we shall have a mechanism that you can start airing your such issues through the Water Sector Trust Fund complaints mechanism. Then this one now brings out the issues of sextortion in the water sector, and it can enable now policies to be more responsive on such issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, this conversation, remember, is going on. We'll still keep talking even after this debate.
My name's Peter Irongo. I'm from Kibera Performing Arts Youth Theatre for Advocacy. But my question is to George. How possible is it to develop a policy document on sexploitation that can include other stakeholders, like in the health sector, and transportation so that it can hold water when being discussed maybe in Parliament for further deliberations.
Thank you. George, let's begin with you. Respond to that question as you also give your closing comments.
I think it's possible to do that. I think it will never be possible to cover all the sectors. It would be very ambitious because sexploitation, that's a word I've just heard from you that I like. It is the meeting point between power and powerlessness, which also has a mix of gender in it. Then that's the exposure then materializes there. So it will be in transport, it will be in health, it will be in water, it will be in very many, it will be in all human interactions where people don't have the same amount of power. So the ambition shouldn't be to get every sector on board, but to get a representative number of sectors on board that then make you confident that you have a reliable general picture that what you are doing covers covers the views of as many people as possible. But it's also something that then reflects human behavior, because that's just how human beings are. That's how we are as human beings. When you have power and we are faced with people who don't have as much power, the temptation to abuse our power, one of the forms in which it can take is to use that power in so as to procure sexual favors. So that's my answer to you. Just have a representative group of actors, sectors to come together that then are able to provide a general picture that this is a problem, especially if those sectors also represent power relations at the lower ends of society, where hopefully you're going to get the highest amount of sympathy. There are types of sexploitation, as I said in my earlier remarks, that are more elective, or arguments can be made that they are of course undesirable and they are awful to have, but they don't represent maybe the types of grave life and death issues that we are talking about here, that if I don't do this, then my children won't eat. It may be that if I don't do this, I don't advance to the next grade in my career. It's awful for you to have to pay that price to advance to the next grade in your career, but it's probably a kind of different situation. There might be, you probably have enough power in your context and situation maybe to have different mechanisms for addressing that type of problem. The last thing I want to say is, although it's human nature for people to take advantage of other human beings, sexual behavior, men's sexual behavior is also very contextual. Sexual predation is also very cultural in geographies, in economic sectors, in age groups, in social categories and that kind of thing. So you'll find, for example, younger boys, when I remember when we were through our college years, the one topic as a group of boys hanging out together, we constantly talked about girls. It was such an important topic for us. And the one thing that we constantly yearned for was girlfriends and relationships, and we never had any. That's, I think, that was the problem, and we didn't know how to begin those relationships. And when you go on in life, you have a different experience. Maybe you have a relationship, and then depending on who you are, that's something you have settled down, and maybe you have a different view about relationships. But you'll also find that, take the case, for example, of politicians. They tend to have big reputations, about sexual offending, or not necessarily sexual offending, but also a big exposure to the use of power, of their power in ways that are sexually offensive. Let me say that. There are many cases of that with no anecdotal stories. That's an example of how cultures, there's a subculture within a group. So you'll find if you have a group of 10 men randomly chosen, none of them politicians, they will have a different outlook to life and relationships than if you have a group of 10 politicians randomly selected. Why? What is the difference? The difference is that they come from different cultures. You arrive in politics, you meet a culture that tells you that it is okay to do certain things that you didn't think was okay before you arrived. And you get onto it and you think it's okay now. It's one of the ways to express the fact that you have arrived is to look for and take certain liberties. So there was somebody who was talking about education. That this is why I support that very strongly. You've got to get a group of men together and talk about these things as men. And is that the behavior that you extend to other people's daughters yourself as a man? And if it is not the behavior you extend to other people's daughters, is that okay? If it isn't okay, what can change? So those types of things talked about by men among men can begin to change societies, can also begin to change because there's also among men, there are many myths about sexuality. There are groups of men who feel that the more partners you have, then you're not man enough if you just go home to your wife. Or you're not man enough if you don't take as many partners as possible. So there are also people who believe that genuinely, or not necessarily believe that, but find they can't resist. So there are many things. So there's the long and short of it, there is a male conversation that I think needs to take place. I think there is also a female conversation that needs to take place. But then there's also a cross-societal conversation that needs to take place as a way of changing behavior. And I think it can have promise. It is a possible way of advancing society and tackling this problem. But taking it as just merely a law and order issue and let's criminalize this and the problem is solved, it is not going to achieve what we are looking for. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much, Sareen, for involving in this conversation.
Thank you, George. Since you mentioned Sareen, please just pass over the mic to her so that she can give us her closing comments.
Look, thank you all for being here today. And I'd really like to point out the consistency, which means that the familiar faces that we had 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, you keep coming back. So I think in terms of, I would never question the commitment that all of you have for this particular program. And we will continue to soldier on. We are going to address the issues that have been raised, pass this law, because I think George mentioned something really important at the beginning of the meeting. There is no justice if there is no law, if the law is not there. Where is your justice going to come from? So, the legal element is really critical, but yes, at the same time, it may not solve all the problem, all the issues. So that is other conversations. Every time we come out of these public debates, we usually do course corrections, and we are now okay with it, that there are a couple of course corrections that need to take place. The last time we had a public debate, there were a number of course corrections that needed to be done. Today, we're going to do additional course corrections until we get it right. But at the same time, I think it's a bit like climbing a mountain, where you have to put those hooks in all the way in. It's slow, but at least you won't be tumbling, tumbling down. So thank you all of us, and I'd really like to special thanks to George for accepting this invitation on short notice, actually. All right.
Thank you, Serene. Malesi, at the beginning of this conversation, after George spoke, you said you feel like you should go back and start making corrections. How do you feel now after listening to what the audience had to say?
I feel that KeosNet continues to be a listening partner, and that for those who have followed this process, you will also notice that we have kept on reflecting the spirit of the inputs that we get along the way. So I would only promise that this has been yet the richest, I would say, conversation that we've had so far in this series of engagements. And I think today we have received very useful insights. And as Sarin mentioned, course correction. We are trying to find the true north. And if we keep on shifting a little bit here and there, it's with that desired movement to really reflect the intent, to really achieve the spirit that is here in this room today. And the actions are going to be diverse. There are things we're asking from the policymakers. There are things we're asking from the regulators. There are things we're asking from ourselves as support entities, but also as the community itself. So we anticipate that there will be enrichment of the policy brief to reflect all these asks that we're having for different groups of stakeholders. Of course, as you will also note from the brief, one of the key things that we have done in terms of the legalese, the specific reference to amendment of law, we have tried to separate from ourselves from specifically asking for a sector-specific inclination of the amendment. In fact, if you look at the first recommendation, it basically is an open-ended recommendation, which would then speak to the concerns of, are we just pushing for a wash-based sextortion intervention? What about the transport sector, which in our last meeting seemed to be very big, the security sector, and so on. So our proposition in the current version tends to project an all-round intervention if we are able to get it through. And to get it through, one of the things we want to do going forward is integrate these very useful inputs, but also have in place very specific champions. And if Charles is going to accept, he will be one of those champions. But we've also been having conversations with the Honorable Martha Karua. Right now, there is too much conversation about her, so we are letting her settle those issues first. But we are hoping she can be also one of our champions on this course, so that it really gets the right momentum, the right placement when it then becomes the higher level policy conversation. Now, as I conclude, just to really also appreciate the entire audience, the participants, for their very useful inputs and for being here. Even listening is very important, because once you hear, you can tell somebody else, even if you don't speak at this session. So we thank you, and on behalf of KeosNet and PASJA, who have supported this, and of course our implementing partners, especially Umande Trust and our very valuable champions, we really thank everybody for their contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Malesi. Irene, you'll have the final word.
Okay, thank you. Mine is just to reiterate that the way we get angry when politicians are accused of abuse of office, we should get angry when we hear cases of abuse of authority, particularly in provision of a basic service like water. So abuse of authority essentially is a key element when you're talking about sexual exploitation, which we have agreed is about exploitative relations that are underscored by power dynamics as well as vulnerabilities. So where you have that, particularly in the context of anything related to human rights and water as a right by itself, but then also related to human dignity. There is no willing buyer, there is no willing seller. It's not a market you're going to buy oranges and apples, okay? Or bananas. It doesn't work like that. We are talking about dignity, we are talking about basic rights. So in that sense, yes, protection issue is the core mandate of the state that is given, and there are structures that have been put in place to effect that element of protection, which is a core obligation of the state. But then at our level in this space, we all have roles to play in our engagements with the local communities, in our capacities as service providers, in our elements as advocates and champions. We all have a duty of care to ensure that this conversation is not just within this space, but it's taken through, even internally within our own organizations and agencies. So making a difference will not start with the law that we are calling for currently, but it starts with our ways of doing things and the way we are also relating with the communities to keep the conversations going. So I'm really happy that we are all part of this process, and of course I look forward to seeing some of the fruits coming out of this engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. Excuse me. Listening to everyone's comments from our panelists to the audience, and the recommendations shows how important this public debate was, and the need to fast track the policy brief to a policy that can be anchored in law, and also including the recommendations that have been raised by the audience. At this point, we have come to the end of this debate, but it is only the continuation of a journey that, as Irene said, will bear fruit. We will break for lunch as we close, but before we do so, allow me to thank you for your attention, for participating, and for being an easy audience. I am Mashirima Kapombe. It has been my pleasure moderating this debate, because I will not come back here. It is with great honor that I now invite Dr. Muthio Nzao, the Program Officer of Partnership for African Social and Governance Research, to close this meeting. Karibu.
Thank you. How do I adjust this? Could you help me? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mashirima Kapombe, for inviting me to this platform. I greatly recognize and appreciate the efforts of KeosNet. Sorry, again, I should introduce myself again. I'm Muthio Nzao. I am a postdoctoral fellow and a program officer at PASGA. I'm here to represent my program manager, Dr. Martin Atela. I greatly recognize and appreciate the efforts of KeosNet for spearheading this forum and for all supporting institutions, including my own PASGA, and to our capable panelists, our moderator, Mashirima, and to each and every one of us for creating time to be part of this important and indeed overdue discourse. We should all be very proud of ourselves as we are already negotiating for a better change, right from our households to our institutions and to our country. As a woman seated this morning through this conversation on sextortion, it has been a real trigger. I have faced sextortion demands in many facets of my life since I was a young girl growing up in rural interiors of Machakos to the everyday hustle of Nairobi, in visits in Asia, and even in advanced economies of Western Europe. I am lucky that I did not have to transact using sex as a currency, but clearly many women, hundreds and millions of women in this country and in this world do not have that option to opt out. Therefore, sextortion is not only a Kenyan problem, it's not an African problem, but it is indeed a global problem. And this conversation is extremely necessary. What matters or what differs is really the manifestation of sextortion. And right here at home, as we are speaking about sextortion really for basic needs, it is very painful. But at the same time, I'm filled with great hope that we are having this painful discussion at this public policy debate. We are faced with a threefold challenge, and which I think we can turn into our theory of change. And we have identified there are critical institutional gaps, and we have identified that we cannot lax on creating awareness, and we have also identified technology as being very important in helping us to mitigate sextortion. And therefore, we ought to be part of agents of change in streamlining our institutional structures, right from the law and legislation to the water vendors, and indeed, as the gentleman from Kibra put, into our advocates and advance the legal provision. We must not lose hope to address sextortion as corruption, full stop. That is what it is. And we must not fail to recognize that the lack of institutional and legal frameworks makes it very difficult for victims to file a report, to get a guarantee for protection and for social stigma. And therefore, we must advocate for structures, but we also must realize that they must be met by awareness, and they must be met by technology that should minimize and eliminate obstacles in tackling sextortion. And therefore, mine is to encourage all of us as we go out. I strongly believe that each one of us is the first agent of change, that we should not lose hope, and we should continue to have this discourse in our homes, in our institutions, and indeed as we hope to institutionalize this policy brief. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and we hope to meet again in such forums in future.
At this juncture, I would like to invite us all to move outside so that we can take a group photo, starting with our panelists and the rest of us. Then we can proceed for lunch. Asanteni sana. Lunch is downstairs.